The Chamber of Horrors, A Tale of the Assassin Without a Name by Scott Marlowe. I often meet prospective clients in public locations. Such places put their minds at ease that a meeting with me isn't going to end in some sort of foul play. Oftentimes it's a quiet wine shop or tavern with a proprietor I know from experience. Couldn't care less about the business conducted under his roof as long as you're spending good coin at his establishment. It's one reason I always order the most expensive wine and tip well. But public places don't always work, especially when the client is recognizable, like a popular politician or successful business person. Those times, I let the client select the meeting location, which, more often than not, finds me wandering a series of back alleys in the middle of the night to a secluded store, warehouse, or some similarly deserted place. Not so this evening, though. While I was on my way to visit with one of the city's most successful purveyors of airship manufacturing, a recognizable figure if ever there was one, he preferred we meet at his home in the Manchester borough. Roland Fairwind was his name, and while he was the worst sort of person, he was the best sort of client, because men like him kept me gainfully employed. Mr. Fairwind hadn't remarried yet, so there was no telling who he wanted dead this time. But since I was coming up on his estate now, I knew I'd find out shortly. I strolled casually by the place from the other side of the street, as much to scan the perimeter as to determine if Mr. Fairwind had decided I was a liability he wished eliminated. In my line of work, one can never be too cautious, but I saw nothing other than a sleepy manner. The lone guard posted at the gate was half slouched over and probably half asleep. He barely noted my passing as I rounded the estate's wall to make my way to the eastern service entrance. Hopping the wall, I slipped past a pair of unsuspecting guards patrolling the grounds and made my way to a hidden side entrance I'd used the last time Mr. Fairwind had summoned me for a job. 3 knocks, a pause, followed by 2 knocks was the entry code, so once I'd tapped that out, I didn't have long to wait before the door slid open soundlessly. You have to respect a steward, who ensures that even his master's secret entrances are well-oiled and quiet. Inside, I found said steward waiting for me. "You, sir, are late," he said, addressing me in a dull tone devoid of the excitement for life. He was a soulless-looking fellow, gray-skinned and darkly dressed. I rolled my eyes. "I only learned about this meeting late this morning, so you'll have to excuse me if my other plans ran a little later than expected. Now, shall we continue bantering about my tardiness, or shall we go see the master of the household?" The steward said nothing as he led me down a darkened corridor to a small waiting room. "I will fetch Mr. Fairwind," he said, the monotone of his syllables fitting his dark demeanor perfectly. He returned some minutes later at the heels of his master. "Mr. Tollwood," Roland said, a smile lighting his face. He raised his arms in greeting, but didn't go so far as to offer me his hand, which was probably for the best, because I wouldn't have taken it. "So, good to see you again." Russell Tollwood was the alias I'd used when we met before. Though I hadn't heard the name since, slipping into its use was easier than most disguises because it was a name and nothing else. Typically, when I conducted business with a client, exchanging names wasn't necessary, but Roland had wanted to call me something, so I'd made one up on the spot. I crossed my arms. "You have a job for me?" Roland's arms crashed to his sides. "Right to business." "That's one of the many things I like about you, Mr. Tollwood. That and your impeccable efficiency." He turned to his steward. "Isn't that what I was saying earlier, Grom?" The way Mr. Tollwood executed, no pun intended, our prior arrangement was a lesson in efficiency. The proposal is made, negotiations ensue and are concluded, and the contract is executed. Roland chuckled this time. "Not unlike any other business deal except at the conclusion someone is dead. We should all strive for such competence, don't you think, Grom?" "Undoubtedly, sir. Now to business," Roland declared, taking a seat at a small parlor table. "Grom, wine for myself and the gentleman. Please, Mr. Tollwood, have a seat." "If it's all the same to you, I'll stand," I said. Roland shrugged, sat back and crossed his legs. While Grom set out 2 wine glasses, he twiddled at one end of his mustache while relating why he'd summoned me. As one might imagine, Mr. Tollwood, my business is highly competitive. There are the mainstays, my peers, if you will, who had the foresight to see how the industry was changing from land to aerial transport, and so made the early sacrifices and investments to ensure their businesses continued to thrive. But occasionally, a new face emerges, someone with new energy and the grand ambitions to match. While I applaud those who show such initiative, it doesn't change the fact that the market can only bear so many players. As such, it is necessary to thin the ranks, so to speak, from time to time, so that those of us born to this life can truly flourish. What Mr. Fairwind described was a tale I'd heard too many times to count. One businessman sees another threatening his income, so rather than creating a better product or running a more efficient business, they call on me to take care of their problem for them. I'm not complaining. Without the Rolands of the world, I'd be out of a job. And if not for the previous work I'd done for Mr. Fairwind, which still left a bad taste in my mouth, I wouldn't think twice about taking more work from him. But the simplicity of what he proposed intrigued me. Nothing in my line of work was more clear-cut than eliminating a business rival, and, truth be told, it had been a while since I'd worked a good, honest job. Something about settling into ordinary work for a change appealed to me, so I showed my interest by asking the requisite questions. What's the mark's name? Any particulars as far as how I do the job? Grom had finished pouring the wine, so Roland picked up his glass and, like a barbarian who didn't understand the subtle delights of fine wine, drank deeply. While I waited for him to answer, I took my glass to a corner of the room, where I leaned against the wall. I sampled the wine, a spiced red with a hint of cloves, with a quick sniff, a swirl, and finally, a small sip. To my surprise, I found it much better than I expected. Your target's name is Sebastian Chase. He founded Eastern Ways, which, as you probably have already ascertained, specializes in designing and constructing air vessels. His designs are being hailed as revolutionary, with promises of cutting flight times and reducing time to market for transported goods. The trajectory of his company has been impressive, I'll give him that. But the man has no sense of decency concerning the recruitment of new customers. His ambitions have cost me a fair sum of money already. Too much to ignore, for certain. As to how the deed is done, I will leave that to your discretion, as long as it never comes back to me. I tasted my wine, savoring the warm, bitter flavor as it washed over my tongue. That goes without saying, Mr. Fairwind. Rest assured, your name will have no connection to Mr. Chase's demise. Roland nodded vigorously. Of course. You've demonstrated your discretion to me in the past, so I have no fears at all in that regard. Know that by doing this deed, you ensure Fairwind Transport continues to thrive for the foreseeable future. I didn't care one bit about all that, but I kept those thoughts to myself. Like before, Roland said, please keep me informed of your status and progress. A rival suddenly leaving the playing field opens up new opportunities I will want to seize upon the moment Mr. Chase's fate becomes public knowledge. My sources in the King's Hall of Records tell me Mr. Chase has not planned for this situation, so the government will have no choice but to seize his assets and sell them off at auction. However, I intend to head off that process and ensure his designs and ongoing projects become part of my operation. It is only fitting, after all, since I'm doing all the work. Such ambitions told me Mr. Fairwind had planned this from the start. Furthermore, he'd done this before. Now, Roland said, as for payment, I assume the same as last time? That's fine, I said. How soon do you want this done? I can usually guarantee 2 to 3 weeks, assuming no extenuating circumstances prevent access to the mark. Roland shot up, almost spilling his wine. 2 to 3 weeks won't do. I want it done by the end of the week, no later. Roland Fairwind was used to getting what he wanted. The end of the week meant 4 days, which wasn't unreasonable if I found myself suitably motivated. While I found the idea of disappointing Mr. Fairwind tantalizing, there was another way to ensure he felt the burden of his urgency. I can promise the end of the week, I said, but it'll cost you. Roland narrowed his gaze. How much? Triple my normal rate. His eyes widened. That's outrageous. I'll pay you double and not a florin more. We haggled some more, finally settling on an amount halfway between what we each wanted. With Roland, as with most traders, it was more about the haggling than the actual amount. People like Mr. Fairwind bathed in golden crowns, I reminded myself, which made me wonder why I hadn't asked for more from the start. Next time, I told myself. This week, it was Mr. Chase. Next week, it would be someone else. I knew I hadn't heard the last from the Roland Fairwinds of the world. With the details decided upon, Grom showed me the way out. As the secret door slid closed behind me, I pulled my jacket tighter and made my way back to the street. Then I headed home for a good night's sleep. Tomorrow I'd start learning everything I could about Mr. Chase's routine, and then I'd kill him. As it turned out, Sebastian Chase's routine was ordinary and dull. It seemed he'd decided against taking his newfound success for granted, concentrating on work and nothing else. Though I learned Mr. Chase possessed charm to match his handsome good looks, he socialized little. His schedule consisted of rising early for work, seeing to his business's accounting before overseeing the progress of various ships under construction, then having a quiet dinner either by himself or with a small audience of potential customers before working some more and eventually heading off to bed. More often than not, he never left his home or office, which was convenient for him since they were one and the same, but not as much for me because Mr. Chase lived on one of his newly built airships. The cost of home ownership or renting a business suite was too much for the fledgling Eastern ways, and this way one of his employees informed me the company's owner remained close to the shipyards and docks where most of the activity surrounding his business occurred. While I admired Mr. Chase's dedication and hands-on approach, it seemed a dull, lonely life, full of work and little pleasure. As promised, I intended to fulfill the commission within the agreed-upon time frame, and since my employer requested an update on my status, I stopped by Mr. Fairwind's manor 2 days into the job and once more in the middle of the night. Grom was to remain at my disposal, so I wasn't waiting more than a few minutes before the secret door slid open to reveal the steward's gray face. No need to go inside, I simply said, "Tomorrow night," before slipping away. Since this was my final task of the evening, it was off to home and bed after that. I slept well, rose early to bathe, and ate a good breakfast of eggs, potatoes, and a whole slab of bacon. Then I whiled away most of the day lounging about with a good book. The Charlatan's Revenge, it was called, full of mystery, intrigue, and court politics. The title character, who had no legal claim on the throne, convinced everyone otherwise until he is revealed, cast out, and left for dead. What follows is a tale of manipulation, coercion, and violent murder, but I haven't finished it yet, so I can't recommend it either way. The story intrigues me, though, and I look forward to the ending. While reading, I drank sparingly, needing my wits about me that night, and soon enough, I had my cue to get ready as the sun faded and night's darkness crept in. Since ridding myself of my blackguard problem, I'd returned to my usual haunts, which included my place in West End, where a secret closet concealed most of my gear. Once I was appropriately dressed in black leather armor and all the usual weapons, including my Steel Island sword, I navigated the stairs to the roof. Since the Mark spent most of his time on his flagship, the Aurora, I headed straight away for the airship docks. Tower 6 was the Aurora's assigned berthing, and while the docks were quieter than usual, they were never without their share of activity, with dirigibles coming and going at all hours and the constant loading and unloading of goods the rule rather than the exception. It made ascending the tower slightly more difficult with all the bustle, but not impossible, given my skill at skulking. I found the Aurora right where I expected at berthing 652, where she was docked for the week while undergoing inspections. An idle airship meant lost profits, but the inspections were city-mandated, often time-consuming, and impossible to avoid unless you knew the right people to bribe. Mr. Chase apparently did not. Otherwise, he presumably would not have allowed his fleet's flagship to remain out of commission for 1 day, let alone 1 week. The Aurora's purpose was to demonstrate to prospective clients the efficiencies achieved by its owner's designs by carrying real customer goods from one side of the 4 fiefdoms to the other, so the dirigible was a vital part of the customer acquisition side of Mr. Chase's business. It was a credit to Roland's planning that he'd called me when he did, since the Aurora had several more days before the completion of the city's inspections and, therefore, an ample window of opportunity for me to fulfill my contract. No one accosted me as I quickly slipped across the gangplank and boarded the Aurora. I'd spent some hours in the city records office, perusing the airship design plans that Mr. Chase had filed as part of the license and permitting process. While some aspects of Eastern Way's ship designs were secret and proprietary, the company was still required to file plans detailing the general specifications, deck floor plans, and other esoteric details that didn't concern me. The ship plans were my sole interest, so I'd spent some time studying the Aurora's layout, learning the location of her cabins and configuration of her passageways so I knew where to go once on board. Presently, the airship had no cargo and therefore contained nothing valuable, so no reason to post guards, making the job of reaching Mr. Chase's private cabin easy. It was past supper time, and since my intelligence gathering had told me he liked to spend a few quiet hours at his desk reviewing the books and such at that time, I expected to find him there alone. The tricky part was killing him before he had time to raise the alarm. As soon as I revealed myself to him, I knew every second counted. Looking up and down the hall to make sure no one was coming, I placed a hand on his cabin door. Then, inhaling slowly, I twisted the knob and plunged inside. Mr. Chase was at his desk, slumped over, asleep, and unmoving. I didn't bother closing the door behind me. This would be over in seconds, as I bounded around the desk, readying my killing knife to do its work. I stopped when I saw the hilt of someone else's knife already sticking out of Mr. Chase's chest. He wasn't slumped over because he was sleeping. He was slumped over because he was dead. I supposed I should feel surprised at this unexpected turn of events, but I felt only disappointment because now I wasn't going to get paid. I scanned the corpse, the desk, and the cabin's interior, looking for clues to tell me who had done this. As my mind wandered over the possibilities, I heard boots, lots of boots, running down the outside passage and drawing closer with every stomp. I knew the clomp of those boots well enough that it didn't surprise me when the first cobble stomper appeared in the open doorway. His face, initially lit with surprise, quickly turned to angry determination when he saw the dead man seated behind the desk and me standing over him dressed in black, wearing a mask and with a knife in one hand. "Assassin!" he yelled. He stepped into the cabin with his club raised. Behind him, more city guards poured inside until a sea of menacing visages, cheap armor, and an array of weapons separated me from the only way out. "Now, gentlemen," I said, "I know what this looks like, but I can assure you I did not kill this man." I held up my knife for emphasis. "See? No blood." Jaws clenching tighter and grips firming on weapons told me they were unconvinced. "Besides," I said, pressing on, "why would I have another knife drawn if I'd already plunged one into his chest?" "Because you wanted to make sure he was dead?" one of the guardsmen asked. "Fair point. But then, why not use the same knife?" Knowing I'd taken this conversation with Alchester's finest as far as I could, I grabbed the hilt of the knife sticking from Mr. Chase's corpse and pulled it free. Then I shoved the chair with the body slumped in it aside so the desk blocked my adversary's immediate rush, which came in the next second. Sometimes the least expected move is the best one. So I leaped onto the desk, waited a fraction of a second for them to form up all around me, their clubs swinging and daggers and swords stabbing. Then I jumped into their midst, landing hard on one guardsman and knocking him back so that a small space was cleared leading to the exit. I lashed out in all directions, my knives driving those closest back, then plunged ahead, shouldering, elbowing, and punching my way through their midst until I won free. In the hallway, more cobble stompers. It was flattering they'd sent so many to apprehend me. Came into view from one side, so I promptly ran down the hall in the opposite direction. I surprised an airman around the first turn, but he had no idea what was happening, so I breezed past him and after navigating the maze of below-deck passages, climbed a ladder to the main deck where more cobble stompers stood around waiting for word from below. One pointed at me and shouted to get the attention of the others. Then the chase was on. I couldn't reach the gangplank with so many blocking the way, and since I heard others stomping below, I went the only direction left open to me, which was straight up. Leaping for the nearest bundle of ropes, I was already out of reach by the time the nearest guard reached my position, and it would have been a clean getaway from there if a handful of them hadn't had the foresight to bring crossbows. One bolt and then another whistled by. A third embedded itself in the mast right above my head. I looked up, but the crow's nest was too far to offer refuge as another missile flew by. My sole advantage was that Alchester's guardsmen were terrible shots, but even the unluckiest of marksmen catch a break eventually, so I knew I needed to get out of this situation right now. Scrambling a little higher, I drew a knife to sever a line from the mast. Damn crossbows, I thought, as another bolt whizzed past me. But I'd cut the line now, so, tightening my grip, I pushed off, swung through the air, and landed with surprising accuracy on the berthing platform. The cobblestompers must have finally run out of personnel since no one was there to prevent me from descending the stairs. I ignored shouts from the Aurora calling for me to stop, as if I'd gone through all that just to surrender, and took the stairs in 2s and 3s to the ground. From there I melted into the surrounding darkness of a never-used tower, where gas lamps remained unlit, watching as the cobblestompers searched to no avail. The airship docks were spread across a wide area, and since no one had seen what direction I'd gone in, they'd little hope of finding me. I spent an hour waiting for the guardsmen's numbers to thin enough for me to get free of the docks and thinking about what I was going to do to Roland Fairwind once I found him. Mr. Fairwind had some explaining to do. The hour was late, so as I approached Roland's manor, I wasn't surprised to find the place dark and quiet. Mr. Fairwind shared his residence with Grom and a handful of servants, but their quarters were at the opposite end of the house, so I expected to find my employer alone. I eschewed the secret entrance this time since it only opened from the inside, instead climbing a drainage pipe to the second story, where I explored the roof until I found a window to Roland's bedchamber. He had it open to let in the cool night air, making my job all the easier as I crept inside to find Mr. Fairwind snoring away. Beside him was a woman I did not recognize, but her purpose here was obvious, given her cheap makeup and the thin dress flung over a chair. Since she was not part of this, I went to her side of the bed and, placing a gloved hand over her mouth, gingerly shook her awake. Sleepy eyes went wide with panic when she saw me, but she stayed quiet and still, so I slowly removed my hand from her mouth, making sure she got a good look at my knife as I pointed at her dress, then at the door. She was more than happy to comply, dressing quickly and hurrying from the room. She might seek out Grom or a servant to warn them, but I doubted it. I wasn't nearly so gentle with Roland. Grabbing him by the throat, I lifted him from his prone position and slammed the back of his head into the headboard. Gah! Evening, Mr. Fairwind. Bet you didn't expect to see me again. What? He wheezed out. I loosened my grip and he barked. What is the meaning of this? I was about to ask you the same question, I said. You set me up. Set you up? He thrashed hopelessly against my grip, which remained tight enough to feel uncomfortable. I did no such thing. Then how do you explain this? I held up the knife I'd taken from Mr. Chase's corpse. The initials RF were engraved on the hilt. Under any other circumstances, the initials could mean anything. But, given the current situation, the inscription was far too coincidental. That's my knife, he said, gasping. Why do you have it? Because I found it at Sebastian Chase's place and thought you might want it back. Roland's head rattled back and forth. I don't understand. I found it in his chest, I said. Roland's bewilderment compounded. I huffed. You paid someone else to kill him, knowing I was on my way to do the deed myself. Then you notified the City Watch so they could arrest me. The wheels of Roland's mind spun rapidly. But that's preposterous. He squirmed some more in my grasp. If you'll release me, I might... Since he wasn't going anywhere, I let him go. Roland rubbed at his throat, then said, What reason would I have for setting you up? Not to mention, why have someone kill Sebastian with a knife that someone might trace back to me? I thought I made it clear enough. I want no one suspecting I had anything to do with Mr. Chase's murder. It's not good for business. I studied Roland's face, looking for some sign of deception. Either he was an excellent liar, or he really was telling me the truth. I didn't doubt Mr. Fairwind knew how to lie and lie well, but he had seemed genuinely surprised to hear about the circumstances of his rival's murder. For now, I'd take him at his word and assume he had nothing to do with it. I pulled my mask down and helped myself to the brandy I saw on a tray when I'd first entered. Behind me, Roland rustled out of bed and grabbed a robe to conceal his nakedness. "Why ever would I want to set you up?" he asked again, as he tied the robe at his waist. "You've done everything I've asked, and then some. Besides, how foolish do you think I am? I would never cross you, given what you do for a living. The way you made my wife disappear. I've no doubt you could do the same to me." He had a point there. "Other than Grom," I asked, "who else knew you hired me?" "No one," Roland said, coming over to the tray to pour himself a glass. "May I see the knife?" I tossed it onto the tray. Roland picked it up and quickly inspected it. If he noticed the dried blood on the blade, he did not mention it. "It's mine, all right," he said. "I keep it in my desk, but the drawer isn't locked. Anyone could have broken in and taken it, though I've no idea who." "Grom?" I asked. "My steward may have the dourness of the grave about him, but he's served my family for decades. I can't believe he would have anything to do with wheels turned, then he had it. Whoever did this wasn't trying to set you up. They were trying to set me up." That was self-centered of him to think I wasn't a target as well. "Not just you, but both of us," I corrected him. "Otherwise, why alert the authorities at the precise moment I was on Mr. Chase's ship? And why send so many guardsmen? I'd thought this through on the way over. Their numbers implied that whoever was behind this knew my identity, and so made damn sure the cobble-stompers arrived in full force. Whoever killed Mr. Chase used your knife to tie you to the murder and summoned the city guard to make sure they captured me. The knife alone wouldn't implicate you in Mr. Chase's murder, but my confession, which the Inquisitors would have gotten eventually, would have." "Your confession, the knife." Roland sniffed. "You're right. But why? This implies a conspiracy, a reason to waylay both of us. What connects you and me so intimately that someone wanted to rid the world of us in one fell swoop?" I think we both knew the answer to that, but it took me saying it before the realization caused Roland to sink back onto his bed. We had no other connection, so it had to be her. Mara. With any other person, I would have expected an expression of sadness at the mention of one's dead wife. Perhaps a sigh of longing over some memory or regret at what had happened to her. But I reminded myself that this was the man who'd paid me to kill her, so Roland's anger didn't surprise me one bit. Damn that woman! He nearly threw his empty glass across the room. Instead, he slammed a fist onto the mattress, then stood and spun to face me. "Even from the grave, that horrid woman haunts me. What are we to do about this?" "We figure out who is behind this scheme and make sure they never do it again." Roland nodded. "Right. Of course. I imagine this sort of thing is more in your purview than mine, so I will let you take the lead." "How gracious of you," I said. "Now, you're sure no one knew about your intentions toward Sebastian Chase?" "Positive. Oh, I may have said a time or two that we'd all be better off if he had never entered the trade, but everyone says things like that. I certainly never told anyone I meant to have him removed permanently or spoke to anyone about the specifics of our arrangement. Remember, I can't have people thinking I had anything to do with my wife's disappearance. If I'm willing to hire an assassin to take out a rival, then why not my late wife, too? That sort of reputation isn't good for business." I thought some more. "Then Grom was the only other person who knew you'd hired me. Is he here? I need to speak to him." "Of course he's here," Roland said. "Probably sleeping, given the hour. Though I don't see what information you expect to get from him. I will summon him. Wait here." Roland exited the bedroom. Some moments later, I heard him shouting for his steward. By the time Roland reappeared with a slow-moving, sleepy-eyed Grom in tow, I was pouring myself a second drink. Grom shook off his sleepiness quickly enough when he saw me. "What is the meaning of this?" the steward growled, his beady eyes looking directly at me. This was the most emotion I'd ever seen from the man. "How dare you enter Mr. Fairwind's bedroom without my express permission? Explain yourself." "Shut it, Grom," Roland said, flashing his steward a look of annoyance. "He's here because someone tried to frame me for Mr. Chase's murder, and he thinks it might be you." "Me?" Grom looked appropriately affronted. "Surely you don't believe him. I am your steadfast and loyal servant, Mr. Fairwind. You know this. I would never think to—" "Never is a strong word," I said. "Whoever is behind this had the foresight to try to have me captured by the city guard. They knew the time and place. Only you and Mr. Fairwind had knowledge of those specifics, and since Roland wouldn't have set himself up, that leaves you as the prime suspect. Tell me, Grom, what was Mara Fairwind to you?" Now, he looked appropriately confused. "Mara? Why are you asking about her?" "Because she's the only reason someone would want to set the both of us up. We have no other connection. Somehow someone found out what happened to her and isn't happy about it. So I ask again, what was Mara to you?" "She was my master's wife. That is all." But he said it quickly, and once the sound of his words had faded and he had another moment to contemplate the question, he said, "She was loved. Despite Mr. Fairwind's reservations about retaining her as his wife, she was a good person who deserved better than the fate we dealt her. But I can assure you my regrets over her death did not manifest into some elaborate scheme to capture you and frame my employer. My fortunes are tied to Mr. Fairwind's, and while I have fond memories of his late wife, those memories are not so grand for me to risk everything on some ridiculous revenge plot." Roland glanced at me, waiting to see which way I leaned. Though I had hoped Grom was the mastermind, my instincts told me otherwise. "It must be someone else then," I said. "Someone who perhaps didn't know the full extent of our arrangement, but who at least had suspicions. Who else had a fondness for Mrs. Fairwind? Or perhaps more telling, who did she interact with most frequently?" I looked at each of them, waiting for an answer. Roland threw his hands up immediately. "Don't look at me," he said. "I could barely stand the sight of the woman most times. I had better things to do than keep track of her relationships." Grom crossed his arms, thoughtful. "She had no real friends that I recall, nor did she spend much time outside the household beyond going to market occasionally. Even those times, I heard from the servants accompanying her that she remained inside the carriage most of the time. While at home, she rarely left her room." Grom painted a picture of a dour and dismal woman, but if she was like that, it was because her husband made sure she was alone, hopeless, and miserable. By the end, he hated her so much that he became obsessed with distancing himself from their relationship and making her life a living hell all the way up until he hired me to kill her. Grom thought some more. "She used to spend a lot of time in the garden, working some, but most often speaking with our former gardener. Also, she attended the theater at least once per month. I think—" "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "What about the gardener?" "Former gardener," Grom said with some distaste. "He left without so much as a resignation letter or a goodbye. He arrived with few recommendations, so that's not surprising. But his rates were low, and he knew his work." "His name?" Grom searched his memory. "Heselton Branwick. He said he hailed from Dover Heights, though I suspect it more likely Lowtown or possibly even the Shambles. I kept a close eye on him, but he kept to his business and caused no trouble while he was here." "That name—" I tried to remember where I knew it from. It only took a moment. I never knew his last name, but I knew his first. All right. Hesul. "You know him?" Roland asked. "Possibly. Balding pate, beady eyes, and gangly like a spider." "That's him," Grom said. "Then I know him," I said. "Not formally, but our paths crossed once. When did you say you employed him?" "Mr. Branwick's employment began in late spring. He was with us most of the summer before his abrupt departure when he stopped coming in. That was shortly after Mrs. Fairwind's disappearance. I can give you the exact dates of employment if that will help, but I will need to check my records first." "No, that's not necessary." The last time I had run into Hesul had been early spring when Father Kem had recruited me to put an end to one of their clergy members, a bishop named Ashunda, if I remembered correctly. Ashunda hadn't been happy with his mortal existence, so he sought to become an undead immortal, or some such thing. Kem's fellow holy men had stopped him, or so they'd thought, until they learned Hessel had outsmarted them. When I found Hezul, he was trying to complete the ritual to restore Ashunda to some semblance of life, or unlife, I suppose one might call it. Hessel had gotten a fatal knife wound to the throat for his trouble, and Ashunda? I never learned what became of him, though I had always assumed Kem's clergy disposed of his remains once and for all. But I'd also thought Hessel was 6 feet under, but since it seemed I was wrong about that, I couldn't help but wonder about the bishop's ashes, too. I need to go see someone, I said. What now? Roland asked. In the middle of the night? I came to see you, didn't I? You suspect Mr. Branwick, Grom said, not asking. But why? Just a suspicion, I said. Something I'd learned about Mara before completing the job to kill her, I wanted to say. But doing so would only lead to more questions, so I kept that to myself. Do you know where to find Heselton? Roland asked. Not yet, but I know someone who might know where to look. Best if you both sit tight. You'll only get in my way if you come with me. Neither argued that point. The hour crept into the wee hours, but since I wasn't one to let things lie, I moved with all haste to a temple I hadn't visited since earlier in the year. A lot had happened since then, and while I thought I'd moved on and might never see Father Kem again, here I was, leaping over the same wall and scaling the same drainage pipe to use the same access door to gain entry into one of the main buildings. Last time I'd chanced upon Kem. But since I knew these priestly sorts worked and slept in adjoining, if not the same rooms, I figured I only needed to search nearby until I found his sleeping quarters. He had his own room, which was fortuitous since I wanted our conversation to remain private. I lowered my mask, then shook the priest once, twice, and finally a third time before he returned my stare with a blurry look. Who? To his credit, he recognized me right away. Oh, you. He sat up, running his hands through his thinning, gray-speckled hair. I never thought I'd see you again. That's 2 of us. I'm here about Hessel. He's alive. Father Kem didn't look surprised. In fact, he calmly folded his hands on his lap and said, I know. I waited for a more thorough explanation. After you left, I went to the secret room you found beneath the stables. I found 3 corpses and the cement block containing Ashunda's ashes, but there was no sign of Hezul other than a blood trail leading away. I secured the bishop's ashes, and since Hezul had disappeared into the night, I prayed we had seen the last of him. Prayer never got anyone anywhere, especially since the old gods were dead. But I didn't think Kem wanted to hear my take on his beliefs, so I said only, Are you sure the bishop's ashes are secure? Kem wasn't, so he dressed, lit a lantern, then led us outside to the temple's principal place of worship. The building was an odd mixture of sharp angles and grandiose features, painted in drab browns, tans, and grays with elaborate windows and a set of doors that might be darkwood oak, though surely not because such grandeur was beyond the financial means of Kem's congregation. Yet, as we walked up to those grand polished doors, I saw they were indeed blackwood. I couldn't help but look at the entire place in wonder. Who pays for all this? I asked, more to myself than anything else, though Father Kem answered my inquiry as he fumbled at a set of keys. With so few churches remaining, people are willing to invest to make sure we don't lose any more. Our congregation has been generous. I'll say, maybe the gods should have died a lot sooner. Kem flashed me a look of admonishment. Then he had the door open and we went inside, where I found the vast interior no less grand than the exterior. Father Kem led us through an arch to one side, then down a flight of stairs to an underground crypt. We stored the ashes here, Father Kem said, holding his lantern high as he led us down one dark hall and then another. Along the way, we passed the final resting places of the church's most generous donors. Past those, we entered a more private space, one reserved for the holiest of the holy, I figured, based on the names and inscriptions on the headstones. Kem rounded a columbarium rising from the crypt's center, then stopped before one specific tomb. The name on it read, Bishop Ashunda Ro, followed by a lot of holy this and excellency that. "Why store them at all?" I asked. Ashunda had involved himself in various unsavory embarrassments, and once Kem's clergy found out, they purged him, meaning they'd burned him alive. Such was the punishment for demon-mongering, dark witchcraft, and, in Ashunda's case, necromancy. Turns out, though, that the bishop wanted to die by holy fire, something to do with a more lengthy process whereby he meant to rise again as a Vashu, which I took to mean a particularly nasty sort of undead. Hasul, in his infinite wisdom, had taken his master's ashes and mixed them into cement, making it especially difficult to scatter them and end Ashunda's villainous aspirations. But why not break the concrete up and do the same? "Politics," Father Kem said, shaking his head in disapproval. He undid the clasps on each side of the tombstone, pulling the lid off to reveal an empty space within. "It seems Hasul was here already," I said. Kem let out a sigh. "It seems so. As you know from our previous engagement, Ashunda was a respected member of our clergy, which is why he has a burial place here at all. And since you wanted to keep his transgressions private, you kept up appearances for the sake of your congregation. But that doesn't explain why you kept the bishop's remains here. You could have put anything inside." "My superiors thought the threat was over," Kem said. "They felt that Hasul, wounded and on the run, was no longer a threat. Obviously, they were wrong." "How did you know Hasul was still alive? What mischief has he wrought this time?" "He's after revenge. Starting with me," I said, leaving out the details around Roland and the potential link with his late wife, who Kem didn't need to know about. "But since he's taken Ashunda's remains, I imagine he'll come for you and the other priests soon enough, though if Hasul gets his way, Ashunda himself will lead the party this time." Kem replaced the lid on the tomb. "Where do you suppose he took the ashes?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But I might know someone who does." "Then I'm coming with you." "That's not a good idea, Father. I know I am not well equipped for these situations, but I'm responsible. I should have pushed harder when they said the threat was over. I need to go with you to make sure Ashunda is stopped once and for all." I thought about arguing some more, but the fire in his eyes convinced me otherwise. Kem was not a man of action, but even the meek will rise up and fight if pushed hard enough. Kem had as much of a stake in this as I did. So far be it from me to keep him out of it. "All right," I said. "But you know this may get messy, so make sure before we leave the temple that you're prepared to do what's necessary. Understand?" "Fully," he said without hesitation, though I had my doubts. "Before we go, there's something I need to retrieve. Do you remember the silver knife I loaned you the last time? I think before the night is out we might need it." "That's the man who's going to tell us where to find Hasul?" Father Kem's expression was half slack-jawed amazement and half disapproving frown. I guess I couldn't blame him. If I didn't know Malachi as well as I did, and this was the first time I'd ever seen him, I'd probably feel the same way. But I knew Malachi better than most, I'd venture. Partially because we went way back, but also because I looked out for him just as he, in his own way, looked out for me. Ours was not a relationship of mutual trust in the conventional sense, but we respected each other, which was enough most times. When it wasn't, a sum of dinars always bridged gaps, greased wheels, and ensured we each got what we wanted. Presently, Malachi was holding court. He sat by a blazing fire, a frothing beer in one hand, and his other placed fully on the wide arse of a lass of ill repute who had taken up a perch on the old scalawag's knee. He held the flaxen-haired vixen's attention, along with most of the tavern's other patrons, who hung on his every word. Malachi was like that. A statesman of the streets, a braggart of the highest order, a minstrel with no equal, and an all-around cheat if ever I met one. But he was also the best informant in the city, hands down, and he knew the instant he saw me why I was here. He didn't acknowledge my presence or halt his story, but kept on as if he hadn't even seen me. But I knew he had, So as the crowd burst into laughter at whatever nonsensical thing he'd said, I motioned at Kem to make his way outside, which was no easy feat given the press of people. Once or twice, seedy individuals stared far too long at Kem, but then they caught my eye, and any potential problems were averted. The good father at least had the sense to dress as an ordinary citizen and not a member of the Holy Order, but he invited attention with his innocent face, well-manicured nails, neatly pressed shirt and trousers, and jacket that was too clean for this part of the shambles. Outside, I found a quiet spot half a block from the tavern where we waited for Malachi. Not long thereafter, his lordship exited the pub and graced us with his presence. Following close on his heels was his dog, Bombadillo, who I'd spied inside resting at his master's feet. "What the hell do you want?" he asked in his grumbling tone. He still had his beer, so he took a long draught of it, wiping the froth from his lips with the back of his sleeve. "Didn't you see I was busy?" "Information," I said, falling to my knees to greet Bombadillo. Scratching his sides just how he liked it, I minded the scars where some arsehole had set him on fire. I knew the fires of hell were hot where I was going when I died, but they burned even hotter for whoever had made sport of Bombadillo. "I know that," Malachi said. "Why else do you ever visit me?" "Mostly to make sure you're not mistreating my friend here." Bombadillo reacted with a lolling tongue as he snuggled closer to me. "Pfft," Malachi said. "Damn dog has it better than most of us. Who's your friend?" Father Kem extended a hand and introduced himself. Malachi examined him up and down. He made no move to accept the priest's gesture. "That thing around your neck tells me you're a priest." Father Kem's hand went to the medallion hanging from a chain around his neck. I had thought it simply a symbol of his god and not anything that designated him a priest, but what did I know? "Don't like priests. Most around here don't. Your kind should have gone away when the gods died, is what most people think." "We're looking for a man named Hesultan Branwick," I said, coming between them before the conversation degenerated into a philosophical discussion on the merits of religion. "Most call him Hasul. He's a gardener by trade, but moonlights as a necromancer." "A what and a what?" "You heard me," I said. "Why would I know anything about that?" Malachi laughed. "Next thing you know, you'll be asking me about dark priests with tattoos on their faces." I knew this game Malachi played all too well, so I spun a dinar in the air that he caught with a practiced, almost expectant motion, making the silver coin disappear somewhere within the folds of his coat with just as much skill. It didn't surprise me that Malachi knew about the Jackery, but tonight I was hunting a different sort, so Onias and his bunch would have to wait. Malachi cleared his throat. "Word is a man with that name has been coming and going from the old Emery estates. No one's sure why. Mention of the Emery estates gave me pause, mostly because it was a place I was still trying to forget. Spinning black orbs that transport you to a different dimension will do that." "Is he alone when he's coming and going?" I asked. "Sometimes. Other times he's got a handful of thugs with him. Also—" "Yes?" Father Kem asked. "Also what?" But Malachi shook his head and waved in dismissal. "Never mind. Thought I remembered something, but it don't matter." I tossed another coin at the old lizard. "Bet it does." "The man's been moving technology into the estates. Alchemical parts and other machinery. Nothing I know anything about, so save your coins. I don't think I can even tell you exactly which estate he's been visiting. Word on the street is that something dark happened there, so no one wants to take a closer look to see what it's all about." "That's all right," I said. "I think I know which one it is." I patted Bombadillo's head one last time. "Thanks for the information, Malachi. We'll let you get back inside where it's warm." He tightened his dilapidated coat about himself and stamped his boots on the cobbles in recognition that, yes, it was cold, but he also hesitated, scrutinizing me as if waiting for me to say something. "Is there something else?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just wondering if you're doing all right." "I'm fine," I said. "Really?" Malachi asked. "Really. It's just that Heavy Hammer, well, you know how he is. He worries too much, I tell him. I say you know how to take care of yourself, but I don't think he believes me. It wouldn't hurt for you to go see him, you know. It also wouldn't hurt to come see me every once in a while. When you don't need something, I might add. Inwardly, I sighed. I had a father once, but he was murdered. In his place, I got an overprotective hillman and a vagabond minstrel, both of whom I owed my life, but I didn't like coming out and saying it, because then things got awkward. You're right, I said. I'll make an effort to stop by more often. Heavy hammer too? I shrugged. If I have to. But I smiled, and Malachi seemed satisfied enough that he grunted and started back toward the tavern. Bombadillo faithfully followed him. I watched them until they disappeared inside. He cares about you, Father Kem said next to me. Like a father, if I'm not mistaken. No, you're not mistaken. Life was hard for a while there, and Malachi and Heavy Hammer took care of me. My sister Olivia, too, but since Kem knew nothing about her, I left her name out of it. Malachi used to knock me around when I was younger. They both did, actually. They what? Kem asked. I smiled at the memories. Don't worry, it was the good kind of knocking around, especially since I deserved it. Malachi helped me see things more clearly. I owe him for that. We left the boisterous activity of the shambles behind, taking a circuitous route that quickly had Kem's head spinning, but which I knew well. Soon enough, but sooner than I liked, we reached the edge of the Emery Estates, which once was a thriving community, but which had since been abandoned and mostly forgotten by all except for dark priests and, now, necromancers. I'd told Malachi I knew which estate Hessel frequented, and while I didn't know that for sure, I had a pretty good idea it was the same one where me and Liz had confronted the Jackery those many months ago. Anywhere else wouldn't satisfy the law of coincidences, that being that there was no such thing. Unlike the last time, when we had snuck in and skulked about right under the Jackery's noses, this time I strode right through the front gate. I didn't think Hiesel's operation included armed guards, and I was right as we entered the square unmolested. Here, black guardsmen acting at the behest of the Progressive Society had stormed the place, rushing in to fight the dark priests in vicious hand-to-hand combat. The fight had been over stolen technology, and me and Liz should have been nothing more than bystanders caught in the middle. But Elizabeth had seen a problem that needed solving. Too bad Onias, the Jackery head priest, hadn't liked her solution. He'd tried to stop her. We fought and, as chance would have it, fell into a dark, spinning orb that transported us to a place that was dark and cold and lifeless. I shuddered, recalling the event like it had happened yesterday. "Are you all right?" Father Kem asked me. I nodded. "Fine," I said, shaking off the memories. "Let's see who's home." Turns out, no one. We searched the main structures first, finding nothing and no one there. Inside the tower was more of the same. We each brooded in silence, trying to figure out what we were missing. Then I had it. "Look for a trapdoor," I said. We shoved dusty old rugs and bits of furniture left behind by the previous owners aside, but saw nothing. "I spotted a stable at the other side of the property," Kem said. "Perhaps we might find something there." But we both knew as soon as we neared the stables that we weren't going to find anything there either, given that the ground leading up to the place was mostly undisturbed. Still, we humored ourselves and looked inside anyway, finding even fewer signs of activity within. I was determined, though, so we tried the manor next. A fine layer of dust blanketing the front entry yielded little hope, but not so with the servants' entrance, where for the first time I noticed the scuff and mud of boots on the dull wood floor. "Someone was here," I said, keeping my voice low. We followed the signs to the main dining room, which was empty but for a dirty chandelier and a grand fireplace that was bare and cold. Traces of muddy boot prints littered the room, though the greatest concentration led up to the fireplace. We both examined it, seeing nothing out of the ordinary, until I spotted the slightest seam between the wall and the mantel. "Look for a switch or trigger," I whispered. "A what?" "Never mind." I felt a loose piece of wood under the mantel and pressed it. That was it. The fireplace slowly creaked forward on a hidden track, opening a space wide enough for men or equipment to pass through. Behind it, I spotted a stair spiraling down. A quick nod at Father Kem to make sure he was still up for what came next. He nodded back, though it was with some apprehension, and we descended the stairs. We each had a small lantern, which we put to use as the way ahead only grew darker. Recent memories of a city beneath a city filled my mind, making me wonder if I descended again into Chorus. The stair led out into a small room, where an archway welcomed us into the long hallway beyond. As we started down it, I wondered if we might find no one down here when I saw a flickering of light ahead. I turned my lantern to its lowest setting. Father Kem followed suit. As we drew closer to the light, a voice called out, "The Nameless Assassin, at last." Seeing no point in further subterfuge, I stepped from the hall into a vast chamber lit by torches set at regular intervals all around the room's exterior. Hessel stood at the room's center. A handful of rough-looking thugs and a trio of Jackery loitered nearby. They all stood around an apparatus that looked all too familiar because of the crackling ball of dark energy spinning at its center. A concrete block, Ashunda's remains, was suspended directly over the dark, spinning orb by a rope tied off next to Hesul. Other passages leading from the room were dark and seemingly unexplored. At our entrance, Hesul stayed put, but the hired help, including the Jackery, fanned out, placing themselves between Hesul and us. "Oh, nigh us know you're here?" I asked, addressing the Jackery priests. "Of course," one said. He was indistinguishable from the other two except for his missing eye, and, on the opposite side of his face, a fresh scar that ran from his chin across his cheek and all the way to his temple. No patch for this one. He had no qualms about letting everyone see his scarred-over socket. "I am Scaraman One-Eye. I am here as an emissary to welcome the Dark Bishop Ashunda back to the land of the living. When he arrives, I will entice him to join the Jackery cause. Onias's order not to harm you stands as long as you do not interfere. If, however, you do." He shrugged, grinning as he raised a wicked-looking flanged mace, the sight of which made Kem blanch. "If I had a dram for every time someone threatened me, I'd be a rich man, so the priest's not-so-veiled threat didn't faze me in the slightest." "That's a nice scar you've got there, Hesul." I drew a knife and pointed it at the long white line of a scar at his throat. "Hurt much still?" The gardener-turned-necromancer's dark robe rustled as he faced the orb. He lifted both arms and said, "Pain is a reminder that all must suffer before reaching true enlightenment. So it is with all who walk the path. But always there are those like you who refuse to take it yourself. Even worse, you keep others from walking it." He was starting to sound like the Jackery. "I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about," I said. "Of course you do not," he snarled, glaring at me. "Your ignorance knows no bounds. You took her from me, stole her away, not even leaving a body to infuse with the power of unlife." "You mean Mara," I said. "Is that why you tried to set me up and frame Roland?" "The pieces all fall together, don't they?" Hesul sneered. "I knew of no other possibility when I saw you skulking about the property one night. Soon after, Mara was gone, and Mr. Fairwind, he couldn't care less. In fact, he celebrated it. I knew that loathsome creature had hired you. Nothing else explained her disappearance." "So what?" I asked, thinking it through. "You had a thing for Mrs. Fairwind? Thought she might run away with you or some such thing?" Hesul looked like he wanted to say something else, but he returned his attention to the orb with some effort and stayed quiet. His silence was the only answer I needed. If any good came from Mara's disappearance, it was that Hesul could never reach her again. Yet if this was about love or even infatuation, I understood the necromancer's feelings all too well. In her last days, I knew Mara as a gentle-souled person who suffered her husband's persecution for reasons I still struggled to understand. Fate had dealt her a bad hand, even more so because she'd crossed paths with me. But a job's a job, as they say, even if it sometimes makes little sense. "I'm not sure what One-Eye told you about the orb or what you plan on doing with it," I said. "But it isn't stable. If you don't deactivate it, It's more likely to blow us all to hell rather than help you bring the dead bishop back. Hesul ignored me. His associates and the Jackery, however, began inching toward us. One Eye slapped his mace into his open palm, while the others drew swords or brandished clubs. "Steady, father," I said when I noticed Kem taking a step back. Then, to Hesul, I said, "Isn't this about how we left things last time?" That got a laugh out of him. "You may have stopped Ashunda's ascendancy last time, but you're too late this time. See? Already the ritual's necromantic energy infuses his ashes. He must mean the purplish energy emanating from the concrete. Nothing like that had happened last time." "Even now the undead life in him stirs," Hesul cried out. "He only needs the shock of dark energy to complete the transformation." So that was where the crackling ball of energy fit into it. I wondered if the Jackery had told Hesul everything, especially the bit about what happens when something touches it. I bet not. The Jackery, led by One Eye and Hesul's henchmen, had nearly closed on us. While the exit remained clear behind us, I had no plans to use it. But neither did I like the idea of engaging 8 assailants while making sure nothing befell the good father. Fortunately, I had a way to even the score. "Father Kem, find a corner of the room and stay there." Reaching into the folds of my assassin's garb, I smashed 2 glass capsules onto the floor. Named Darkest Night, the alchemical's effect was immediate and absolute, plunging the chamber into darkness so complete that Jackery and henchmen alike cried out, some in surprise and others in horror, as the light from flickering torches vanished. We fear the night for a reason, and while the Jackery claim to ally themselves with darkness, they do not truly embrace it as I have. Take their sight away, and they become lost and defenseless. But my master taught me a valuable lesson about the dark, namely that you're only truly blind if you can't see. We have other senses beyond the 5, which few know about and even fewer have mastered. As I drew my Steel Island sword, pairing it with one of my long knives, I called on those senses now, melding thought and feeling to ascertain the location of my adversaries. When deprived of one's senses, especially sight, most freeze in place. Others panic, crying out or shouting. Though they give away their position with their noise, it matters little because I know where they are anyway. I hear their breathing, feel their trembling, and smell their fear, taking my first victim from behind by slashing his throat. The next, I thrust my sword into his gut, not waiting for his corpse to slide from my blade before moving on to find another person to kill. The next is a Jackery, though not One Eye, who had the sense to move when the curtain of darkness fell. Where he is, I'm not sure, and it makes me wonder if he also knows something of the way of the dark when he confirms it by coming at me with a powerful swing of his mace. I know he's hoping the flanges will split my skull, but since I hadn't planned on dying tonight, I catch the haft of his weapon with my unbreakable sword and thrust at him with my knife. I feel the blade slice him and hear him grunt, but then he is away, disappeared into the void, and I hear him no more, because now Hesul begins to chant, the sound of his voice drowning out all else, but serving as a beacon for me to follow. Because of all the people in this room, he is the one I want to kill the most. Closer to the machine and the spinning orb, the absolute darkness was peeled away, illuminated by that strange purplish energy flowing from the block to embrace and twist around the sphere. Hesul stood in front of it with arms raised, his mouth open as he croaked and sputtered what I supposed were words of necromancy. He saw me and laughed. "There's nothing you or anyone else can do. It is done. It is finished. Now, witness the true power of the undead as Ashunda rises from the—" He stopped, open-mouthed at what I held in my hand. "What is that?" "It's called a negative energy grenade," I said, flicking the switch that armed the weapon. "I was supposed to return it to its owner, but I'm sure she'll understand." "It doesn't matter," Hesul cried out, brandishing a knife and holding it over the rope securing the concrete block in place. "Nothing you do matters. It is time for—" Just as Hesel's arm descended, his knife about to cut the line, I threw the grenade at the block, hoping I timed it right, and that when it went off, it shut Hessel the hell up for good. The grenade impacted the block. Hessul's knife arced downward, cutting the rope. The block, all wrapped in purple and black energy, started to fall. Right before the block contacted the spinning ball of energy, the grenade went off, creating a chasm of such darkness even the orb's colorless void failed to match it. Then it all vanished. The block, the exploding grenade and its sphere of negative energy, all the purplish energy, and even the Stilson's orb. All vanished. All around me, the alchemically created darkness had run its course, dissipating and allowing light from the torches, which had been diminished but not extinguished, to burn brighter. Behind me, I saw the shadows of my remaining adversaries regrouping as their sight returned, and they took stock of the situation. "It's over, Hessul," I said. "Call off your men. Tell the Jackery to stand down and surrender yourself to Father Kem. That's the only way you walk out of here." Hessel had fallen to his knees when the grenade went off. Now, he stared at where the orb had hung suspended with an expectant look that slowly changed to disappointment as realization set in. The sphere, the block, all of it, was gone, and I hoped, never coming back. Behind me, I spotted One Eye, bleeding, but still alive. Next to him was one of Hessel's henchmen, who held tight to Father Kem, with a dagger resting close to the good father's neck. One Eye opened his mouth to say something, but he stopped when a flickering appeared where none should be. Impossibly, I saw the Stilson's orb flickering in and out of existence until it was there again. The phenomenon drew everyone's attention, especially Hessul, whose eyes opened wide in excited anticipation. "This is it! He is coming! He is—" An electrical arc shot out from the orb and struck Hessul, crackling around him and causing him to shake and scream. Another tendril lashed out, this time striking a henchman. He also trembled and cried out in agony. Before a third tendril snaked its way out of the orb, I ran for Father Kem, hoping to free him while his captor looked in horror at the crackling ball of dark energy. But One Eye met my charge, forcing me to go through him if I wanted to get to Kem. Meanwhile, another tendril reached out to take hold of a third victim. This time, it grabbed a Jackery, not One Eye, unfortunately, sending him into a fit of spasms like the others. One Eye swung his mace, forcing me back. The snarl on his face told me he'd rather die than give up the fight. Not so with the remaining henchman, who backed away slowly, then turned to run. The one holding Kem, too, freeing the good father. I hoped he had enough sense to turn and escape with them, but Kem had the most unusual look of determination on his face. I saw what he held, and knew instantly why. The silver knife, which he had once given to me to banish the undead spirit of Ashunda, shone with almost blinding intensity. Its brilliance was only eclipsed by the light in Kem's eyes as he approached the spinning orb. I wanted to shout a warning, but One Eye occupied all my attention. Coming at me with such intensity, he forced me back with his maniacal swings. I would say the impossible happened next, but we'd already gone beyond the realm of impossibility the moment we stepped into this chamber and saw that damn spinning orb, which wasn't exactly an orb anymore, as a bulge protruded from it. Despite the spin, the lump somehow remained on that one side, extending further and further even as the electrical tendrils continued to crackle around Hessel and the other two. Their screams drowned out all else until a shriek so piercing sounded throughout that it penetrated thought and stopped even One Eye in his tracks as he dropped his mace to hold his hands to his ears. I did the same, though I held on to my weapons. Father Kem seemed unaffected as he continued his approach. He stopped when he closed the distance, the hand holding the brilliant silver knife poised to do what? But then I saw the ghostly, withered face emerging from the orb, and I knew Kem had the right of it. The dead spirit of Ashunda was somehow emerging from the dark sphere, and Father Kem knew the knife was the only way to stop it. Even as the spirit emerged, the sphere grew in size, spinning faster and faster. More electrical tendrils shot out, not hitting anyone this time, but sending chunks of earth flying as they impacted the walls, ceiling, and floor. The entire room shook. The piercing shriek diminished, allowing me to rise. "Father Kem," I shouted, "we need to go." But he stepped toward that bulging face, either not hearing me or choosing to ignore me. The face was more than just a face now, with the lines of ghostly arms and a torso emerging. Kem needed no further urging, leaping at the thing and stabbing the glowing knife into it. Energy exploded everywhere, knocking me onto my back, so I lost sight of the orb and Kem. Unable to move at first, I slowly pushed myself to my knees. The globe was a chaotic display, with the bulging apparition swirling in all directions with its spin. Though I spotted Kem lying on the floor a short distance away, there was no sign of the knife. Father Kem wasn't moving, so I rose and stumbled to him. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead, but I gambled on the former as I took hold of him by the collar to drag him from this chamber of horrors. One Eye refused to give up, coming at me this time with his bare fists. Tired of him, I dropped Kem, then spun and kicked the Jackery so hard his feet came off the floor. He flew through the air, landing on his backside where I hoped he'd stay. But he tried to get up, so I kicked him again, this time in the face. After that, he didn't move. I took hold of Kem once more, dragging him past the Jackery trapped by the energy discharge. He and the other two had stopped screaming at least, though by the shriveled look of this one's skin, I didn't think I'd ever see them again. Good riddance to the Jackery, and especially to Hesul, but too bad for the henchman, who was probably only looking for an easy job to make some coin. I got Kem out of the room, but didn't stop there. Behind us, the electrical sizzle intensified, and the hallway shook so violently that the way out became clouded in dust, and bits of debris began falling on us from above. I hoisted Kem over a shoulder, stumbling the rest of the way down the hall, and though I coughed with every breath, at least I was still breathing. I couldn't say the same for anyone left behind because, as we reached the top of the stairs, an explosion from below took the floor out from underneath my feet. But I'd come too far to die, so I used every bit of my remaining strength to jump out from behind the fireplace into the abandoned dining room, where I stumbled, tripped, and finally fell face first onto the floor. Kem tumbled out of my grasp, but the motion finally woke him. His moans were a welcome sound since, until now, I wasn't sure he was still alive. For an instant, I thought we were out of danger. But then, I heard the floor and walls of the manor creaking and buckling. I somehow stood and helped Kem to rise. Then, supporting each other, we ran from the collapsing building. Kem went for the conventional exit, but I steered him away from that and toward a window. There was no time to leave by any other means. We crashed through the already broken glass and landed in a heap outside. That still wasn't enough when, behind us, the house shuddered and shook, collapsing first at the roof, then a wall, then what remained of the structure, so we stumbled up again, made one last dash to get away, and finally collapsed once and for all on our backs where we lay for some time. Mindful of attracting unwanted attention, even in a deserted and mostly forgotten district, and wondering what might have become of the henchmen who preceded our exit, I prompted Father Kem to rise. He did so of his own volition, following me in silence as I led us as far from the Emery estates as I could get us. The sun's morning rays were just bathing the city in a faint glow as we stumbled onto a main avenue where people were going about the beginning of their day. Kem still hadn't said a word since he'd woken, and since I knew all too well the shock that might settle in as the adrenaline coursing through his system eased, I steered him to a tavern I knew opened early. The place was mostly empty, so I selected a corner table and ordered 2 coffees. The server brought them out in no time. While I settled back, sipping the bitterness of my drink, I gave Kem a few moments to do the same. The hot, bitter drink had a restorative effect, sharpening my thoughts enough for me to ask how the good father was doing. "You all right, Father?" Kem let out a deep breath, nodding. "I think so." Damn hands won't stop trembling, though. He held out a hand to demonstrate. "That will pass," I said. Faster than others for some. For Kem, it might take a good long while. "Is Ashunda dead?" I asked. Kem shook his head. "I don't know. The knife should have ended his existence. I don't suppose you saw what happened to it, did you? I'll be in no end of trouble when my superiors discover I lost it. Tell them you vanquished an evil undead spirit, and I bet they'll look past any recompense. On the bright side, at least Hesul is gone for good." Kem sat back, thoughtful. There was something about his look I did not like. "He is dead, isn't he?" I asked. "I'm not sure about that either," Kem said. "Hopefully he is. But powerful forces were at work, some of them necromantic. There's no telling right now." That was not what I wanted to hear, but there was nothing to do about it now. We were alive, and that was something worth celebrating. "Care for breakfast, Father?" On me. I thought I heard the good father's stomach growl in response. "That would be lovely." We placed our orders, along with a refill of our drinks. While we waited, we each fell into our own silent brooding. I hoped Kem considered all he'd done and saw something new in himself. The man I'd met before had been simple and meek. Now, well, maybe he was still simple, but he had a streak of bravery in him I didn't know existed. Before tonight, I doubt he did either. Me, I thought about Mara and how her memory had led me to this. Also, I thought about something Roland had said when he'd asked why he would ever want to set me up. There's nothing I can say that won't reveal the truth, so I won't say anything at all other than that things aren't always what they seem, and sometimes disappearing doesn't mean you're dead. But he can never know that. Roland needed to believe I was a heartless killer, and that his wife died at my hands. If these simple but necessary lies must exist, so good people can go on living, then who am I to argue with them? I made my choice a long time ago, and I don't lose sleep over my decisions. Not ever. You've reached the end of this adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel to get a notification when each new story is available. You can view all my books and get the latest news by visiting scottmarlowe.com.